Today, we're diving into the explosive arguments from Rachel Maddow's Blowout, a book that draws a pretty shocking line between the global oil and gas industry and the political chaos that's shaping our world. So, our story kicks off on a kind of grimy little corner in New York City. The year is 2003. Picture this. You've got security teams shutting down entire streets, waving off rollerbladers, and setting up a makeshift pen for the press. You know something big is about to go down. And here's where it gets really weird. Because the VIP causing all this chaos, it's not some movie star. It's Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And he's not at the UN. He's not on Wall Street. He's here for the grand opening of a gas station. So you have to ask, why? I mean, think about how wild this is. Putin was in town for a major summit with George W. Bush, right? But his very first stop was this full-blown photo op, complete with a ribbon cutting, at this tiny Lukoil station, a place that one of its own operators had just called a piece of junk. Then, through a translator, Putin says this. Now, this wasn't just about celebrating cheap gas. No way. This was a signal. It was a statement. He was basically planting a flag on a Manhattan street corner, telling the world that a new era of Russian power was here, and it was going to be fueled by oil and gas. So, the book argues that this whole bizarre event was the perfect metaphor for Russia's entire grand strategy, to weaponize its massive oil and gas reserves, to use them not just to make money, but to gain global power and political leverage. You know, the kind of leverage that lets you, say, threaten to cut off gas to all of Europe in the dead of winter just to get what you want politically? But here's the kicker. Blowout makes it clear that this whole strategy of using energy for domination, it's not some modern Russian invention. Nope, its roots go all the way back to the very beginning of the oil industry itself. We have to go back, way back, to the original titan of oil, John D. Rockefeller. His company, Standard Oil, basically wrote the blueprint that the entire industry still follows to this day. Rockefeller's rise to power was just relentless. Through backroom deals and hostile takeovers, he took this chaotic industry and bent it to his will, until, by the 1890s, he controlled nearly every single drop of oil in America. It was a monopoly so huge, so powerful, that the U.S. Supreme Court had to step in and literally break it apart. But that didn't kill the giant. Oh no, it just created its children. Companies we all know today, like ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP. And this quote from Rockefeller's son, wow, it tells you everything you need to know about their mindset. They saw their cutthroat tactics, crushing competitors, bending laws, not as something evil, but as a law of nature, a necessary sacrifice to create something beautiful. It's the kind of justification you hear from the industry even now. The book argues that these core beliefs became the industry's DNA. First, a deep, deep hatred of any government regulation that gets in the way of profit. Second, this relentless drive to expand and devour competitors no matter the cost. Third, extreme penny pinching, even when it comes to critical safety stuff. And finally, this kind of delusional belief that they're on some higher world-saving mission, which, of course, justifies everything else. Okay, so how does that century-old DNA show up in modern America? Well, for that, let's head to Oklahoma and the strange case of the constant earthquakes. See, guys, like Aubrey McClendon sold fracking with this incredible patriotic passion. It was pitched as this miracle that was going to rescue the American economy, create tons of jobs, and finally make the U.S. energy independent. It was a really powerful promise. But that transformation had a pretty terrifying side effect. Get this number. 10,000%. That's the percentage increase in earthquakes felt in Oklahoma. The state went from having maybe 1 or 2 tiny quakes a year to having hundreds, sometimes several, every single day. The ground was literally shaking. So, how did the industry respond? Well, they publicly blew off the concerns, calling them over-exaggerated and blaming natural swarms. Meanwhile, scientists were drawing this crystal clear line from the quakes straight back to the industry's practice of injecting billions of gallons of fracking wastewater deep underground, which was basically lubricating old fault lines. State geologists who tried to raise the alarm, they faced massive political pressure to shut up or change their reports. And this pattern of putting profits ahead of people and the planet, it is not just an American story. Blowout shows it has a staggering global price tag, one that's paid in corruption, environmental disasters, and just straight-up human suffering.
Let's take the case of Equatorial Guinea in Central Africa. It is the textbook example of what economists call the resource curse. It's this twisted paradox where a country with incredible natural wealth ends up with more corruption and poverty, not less, all because that wealth gets hijacked by a tiny, ruthless elite.
So where does all the oil money from Equatorial Guinea actually go? It pays for the absolutely unbelievable lifestyle of the president's son, Teterin Obiang. We're talking a $30 million mansion in Malibu, a fleet of supercars, a private jet, and, get this, shopping sprees on Rodeo Drive, paid for with cash that was literally stuffed inside Nike shoeboxes.
And the tragedy here is just so stark. On paper, Equatorial Guinea is a rich country. Its income per person blows its neighbors out of the water. But in reality, when you look at things like education and healthcare, they're an absolute shambles, on par with the poorest nations in the world. The oil money gets sucked up by the guys at the top, and the people get nothing. And beyond all the corruption, there's the catastrophic environmental cost. The 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster, that wasn't just an accident. It was a moment that ripped the curtain back and exposed an industry that was totally and completely unprepared for the gigantic risks it was creating. This quote from an official in the command center just says it all. It was pure chaos. The industry, which had promised regulators over and over that it was ready for anything, was completely helpless. The book reveals that their main, proven tool for cleaning up a deepwater spill, the one they fell back on when all else failed, was little more than giant absorbent pads they called paper towels. It goes right back to that old Standard Oil DNA, doesn't it? Pinching pennies on safety and planning. Okay, so after connecting all these dots, from a weird gas station opening in Manhattan to the ground shaking in Oklahoma to global corruption and environmental ruin, Blowout brings it all together into one huge overarching argument about the future of democracy itself. Here's the core argument, plain and simple. The oil and gas industry, whether it's state-run like in Russia or private like in the US, is just too powerful and too profit-hungry to regulate itself. It will always, always work to bend governments and laws to serve its own interests, undermining democracy in the process. And that leads us to the final, really challenging question the book leaves us with. If the industry has proven again and again that it can't, or won't police itself, then who has the power and the will to actually hold it accountable? And that's where we'll leave it, with this final, powerful quote from the book. It frames this whole thing not as some simple policy debate, but as a fundamental fight for our future. The stakes, it argues, well, they couldn't be any higher.